Hey everybody, yesterday Apple released version 10.0.3 of their Final Cut Pro 10. And I think it's a really big improvement, and it's a huge update. I think it finally kind of puts to rest some of the issues and concerns and complaints that a lot of people have had ever since its release last June. Now, from my own experience with Final Cut Pro 10, it hasn't been a very easy ride. Before it even was released, Apple released screenshots and limited demonstrations of it online, and I knew right away I hated it because it looked like iMovie, and I hate iMovie. It was very reminiscent of the time when I was using iMovie HD and they came out with iMovie 08, and I'm like, oh no. In fact, that hatred of that interface was the reason why I moved from iMovie HD to Final Cut Pro in the first place. So I was not a fan of Final Cut Pro 10's interface. I loved the feature set. I loved all the things that they talked about that were going to be available for you to use, and the way that it functioned. I loved it, but I couldn't stand the interface. So I knew right away I was not going to like it. In fact, I was not surprised at all when it was released. The universal, hatred that was just faced toward it. But that was Apple's own fault. Apple deserved all that. Now I can't say that it was universally panned, because there were some pretty level-headed editors who said, let's wait and see, because if you take the Final Cut name out of it and look at it as just as a nonlinear editor on its own, for a version 1.0 of a nonlinear editor, it has more tools, more power under the hood, and more functionality than any other nonlinear editor in the history of video editing. And if you think about it, that's true. But Apple didn't do that. They called it Final Cut Pro, and it was meant to replace Final Cut Pro 7, even though it didn't have a whole bunch of the features that Final Cut Pro 7 had. So Apple really shot themselves in the foot with that one. I think they've done a little bit of a better job redeeming themselves with the very quick and current updates that they've done in the past 7 months. But that being said, I want to talk a little bit about my experience with Final Cut Pro 10 and why I like it. So, I knew I hated it after version 10, after it was first released. But fast forward to, I think it was November, when they had a version 10.0.2 out. They also happened to do something that they never have ever done in the entire history of Apple software, and is they released a trial version. And I thought, okay, what can it really hurt? Now, I don't want to be that kind of guy that just universally pans something because of something I've heard other people say. That's why I never trust movie critics, because usually there's something in there that I'll like. So I downloaded it, and I didn't just decide to just casually use it. I wanted to immerse myself in it. So for 30 days straight, that's all I used. And I worked on 2 different actual projects with it. I watched a video series on how to use it. I got myself oriented, and I went to work. The first week was really terrible. I hated it. I still couldn't get over the fact that it was iMovie-esque, and it just drove me nuts. The second week I kind of forgot about the hatred of iMovie, and just kind of got into the nuts and bolts of how it works. And in doing so, things started clicking for me. Oh, that's why they did that. Or okay, this is why they did that. It started making sense. And as I adjusted my workflow accordingly, it got better. By the 3rd week, I liked it. I was actually really enjoying it. By the 4th week, I was sold. I loved it. Now, some people say, well, you should never have to adjust your workflow to software. The software should adjust to your workflow. And I say baloney, because you had to adjust your workflow to learn Final Cut Pro in the first place, didn't you? I mean, it was, for me at least, it was a completely foreign and alien interface. I was used to using iMovie HD, and then I started using Final Cut Pro, and it's like, what is this? You have these 2 TV-looking things that can look at things in the viewer, and then you've got your tracks and your clips over here and your bins, and it gets all confusing on how all that was organized. To this day, I still cannot stand the way that Final Cut Pro 7 splits up the audio and the video tracks into two different panes. Ugh, drives me nuts. So it actually took me less time to get used to Final Cut 10 than it did for to get used to Final Cut Pro from iMovie HD. Now, there are still a couple of caveats that I have about Final Cut Pro 10. The first is that it doesn't support control surfaces, and I use them for everything. I have a Tascam FW1082, which I use for everything. I use it to control Logic, to control Traction, Soundtrack Pro, Final Cut Pro 7, even GarageBand. With this hand, I like to have my transport controls right here. I like to have a jog and shuttle wheel with this hand. Now, Final Cut Pro 10 doesn't support control surfaces yet. So that was something that was almost a deal breaker for me, because I work much faster with that. But then I learned about Contour Design's Shuttle series, where they have the Shuttle Express or the Shuttle Pro, and they actually work in very similar fashions to a control surface with Final Cut 7 or Final Cut Pro 10. Anyway, that saved my experience, actually. And I will actually, in my next video, we'll talk about the Shuttle Express and how I use it, and the differences between it and my Tascam that I use. So anyway, that's my experience with Final Cut Pro. The things I like about Final Cut Pro 10 are things that affect me more in what I do. I love the real-time effects preview. This is something that Vegas Pro has had for ever since, I think, version 1. But finally, Final Cut Pro users get to have real-time effects previews. I love rendering the background. I love being able to adjust and manipulate text in real time on the frame. Not in some text editor over here where I had to look at it on a black and white screen and kind of imagine what it might look like and then move it over and then have to adjust things, and it's not that much fun to do that way. There's a lot of going back and forth, whereas with Final Cut Pro 10 you just put it on the screen, you type it on the screen, you can adjust it, you can adjust the fonts, everything's in real time, you don't have to worry about that. I love the audio editing features. It's much better than in Final Cut Pro 7. I love the magnetic timeline where nothing can collide with each other. I'm a big fan of the audio sync, where if you have more, like if you're using an external audio capture device like the H4n, no more clapping. As long as you have a relatively decent audio signal, you know, it works very similar to Pluralize, which I was very happy to see that built in. There's a lot of other things about it that I just find very cool. I've truly embraced it. I can't say that I won't be using Final Cut 7 for certain things, but I love that the new updates let you, what we talk about with the third-party software download, you can actually migrate your Final Cut Pro 7 projects to Final Cut Pro 10, and vice versa with another utility that goes from 10 to 7. That in and of itself, I think, is amazing. And Apple, even they're astonished that somebody could do it, because they said most likely that function would never happen. You would never be able to move from there to there. But now they can, and evidently it works pretty well. I mean, some people aren't having very good luck with it, but most people are in the 24 hours or so since it's been released. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be looking forward to the next video next week. Have a good day.